In this video, we hike through the streets of Salvador da Bahia, where rhythms of Africa meet colors of Brazil. Its first capital city during colonial times, a city suspended between past and present and the heart of Afro-Brazilian culture, famous for its carnival celebrations. Its history and unique cuisine. So here is the best the city offers, often overlooked by international tourists. We'll show you the nightlife, best places to try authentic food, and where locals go to the beach. We arrived in Salvador da Bahia expecting colorful streets and sunny beaches. What we found was something deeper, a city that moves to its own rhythm, where history, music, and faith are woven into everyday life. Salvador is the capital city of the Brazilian state of Bahia, situated in the northeast coast of Brazil, about 3,000 kilometers from the west coast of Africa. Each year, less than 140,000 international visitors come to Bahia, mostly from Portugal or Latin America, in addition to about 500,000 of domestic tourists. For a city of more than 4 million residents, and with such a unique cultural and historical heritage, those numbers are very low, especially when comparing to Rio de Janeiro or Lisbon. The city does not really cater to international visitors. It was not easy to find any signage or information in English or Spanish. Instead, it offers a journey through colonial history, a unique blend of Afro-Brazilian culture and stunning tropical coastline. From the vibrant beats of historic center to the golden shores around the bay, join us as we discover the flavors, the stories, and the heart of Bahia's capital, a place unlike anywhere else in Brazil, and still hardly visited by travelers from Europe, North America, or Asia. We start our hike from a small neighborhood tucked between a highway and tiny beach. Right on the cliffs, underneath the rising high-rise of the city, Gamboa is one of Salvador's surprising and literally hidden treasures. It is located between the Museum of Modern Art, the white historic building, and the turquoise waters of the Bay of All Saints. And we only found out about it from the Netflix documentary Latin American Street Food. Life is community. Doors stay open. Everyone knows everyone. Gamboa is shaped by the sea and by the people who have lived here for generations. Local artists, divers, sailors, families. Their lives fill the streets with an energy that is relaxed but deeply proud. If you want to visit, come by Uber to the Museum of Modern Arts and walk from there. We came across very few tourists here, walking by, mostly heading either to the beach or the local restaurant that we decided to visit as well. And if you follow the scent of frying garlic and seafood, you'll discover one of the neighborhood's greatest secrets. It's food. Tiny restaurants cling to the hillside, hidden behind winding alleys. Wooden stairways lead down to beach bars perched over the water, where tables are simple, but the flavors are unforgettable. Here lunch is never rushed. You sit under the sun, toes in the sand, and plates arrive when they're ready. One of the most beloved spots is Dona Susana, a modest beachside kitchen that became a local star when it was featured on the Netflix documentary Latin American Street Food. With a terrace overlooking the bay and some of the signature dishes representing Bahia cuisine, this is a gem not to be missed. Dona Susana still cooks the way she always has, with fire, patience, and stories. Her moqueca, rich with coconut milk, peppers, and fish pulled from the bay, is the kind of food that makes you close your eyes after the first bite. The restaurant is simple: plastic chairs, sea breeze, laughter from the next table. But the flavors are profound. Eating here is an experience you might remember more clearly than the famous landmarks of Salvador. Gamboa is not the Salvador you see on postcards. It's more personal, authentic, the real rhythm of the bay. Next, however, we are heading to the historic center of the city. You can arrive by Uber to Modelo Public Market, located in the lower town, or to the Sousa Square in the upper town, both connected by the large elevator built in late 19th century to connect both parts of Salvador. The square is your gate to the historic center of Salvador, surrounded by historic buildings and wealthy mansions. From here, you can venture into the most iconic parts of the city and discover its history from early settlements and colonial times. The present city was established as the fortress of Salvador da Bahia, de Todos los Santos, in 1549 by Portuguese settlers under Tomé de Sousa. This was once one of the most important port zones in the Americas. Gold, sugar, tobacco, everything passed through here. Today, cargo ships share the horizon with fishing boats, and the salty wind carries the sound of seagulls and samba. The lower town is a place of contrasts and in need of much regeneration. Historic buildings beside modern docks, quiet squares next to lively streets, all underneath much more restored upper town with its churches, palaces, and numerous towers. It is not a place recommended to venture around after dark, in contrary to the upper town which we are exploring next. There are other historic electric elevators connecting both parts of the city, some in clear need of repair and funding, a reminder how wealthy the city was during colonial times. Rising above the historic heart of Salvador stands one of Brazil's most remarkable religious landmarks, the Cathedral of Salvador. The building's facade and the square in front of it reflect a mix of Portuguese baroque and Jesuit architecture, a reminder of the powerful religious order that once shaped the colony here. The square is the heart of the historic center of Salvador, with numerous restaurants, cafes, museums, craft stores, and tens of baroque churches and monasteries nearby. It is also where most tourists float to discover the history of Salvador and Brazil. As the first capital of colonial Brazil, the city is one of the oldest in the Americas, with impressive heritage and historical records, shedding light on how civilization evolved here since the arrival of Portuguese explorers and the Catholic Church. One way of exploring the old town is to wander around the narrow historic streets, visit local craft stores, or try fresh coconut from a local vendor. This is certainly a safe neighborhood, and we saw frequently police patrolling the streets, so recording or taking photos out in public did not feel risky in any way. Now, there are other areas in Salvador where you certainly need to take caution when using your phone or camera in public. The core historic center felt safe and very friendly. The only challenge was communication, as hardly anyone spoke English. We were more often lucky with Spanish than English. The area is full of small bars, where you can try local specialties like cachaça, amburana, or homemade liquors with local flavors. The environment is really cool, with great vibe and some surprising shots from local barrels.
Y esta es una mezcla de vino y catuaba, que es una semilla también. Y esta de naranja y esta de canela. Puedes venir y probar.
Cumpleañero, sí.
Madre mía.
¿Cómo se dice feliz cumpleaños en portugués?
Parabéns pra você. Parabéns.
Não sei se
Parabéns pra você.
Feliz aniversário.
Ela é mais cansada que todos, ela é diversificada, é uma boa. É porque tem a cachaça branca que é de barris de inox, então ela basicamente
Creo que la mitad. Ah, no,
essa daqui é Jequitibá Rosa, é uma cachaça mais suave, mais tranquila.
Pero mismo grado de alcohol, ¿no?
Tem álcool,
Sim,
mas
sim.
ela é menos forte em questão de sabor.
De sabor.
Essa daqui é mais
Mismo
intensa
alcohol,
no sabor.
más
É.
sabor.
Essa daqui é mais...
45.
Next, we are heading to Largo do Pelourinho to see some other iconic areas of historic Salvador. No city in Brazil has a stronger African roots than Salvador. Descendants of enslaved Africans shaped the music, religion, cuisine, and identity of this place. Art isn't just entertainment here, it is history alive. Beneath the postcard beauty architecture, this place carries deep memories of slavery and its consequences until today. Salvador is one of the largest cities in Brazil, and by far with most Afro-Brazilians, where whites comprise only less than 17% of the local population in Bahia. The name of the historic district, Pelourinho, means whipping post. It was here that enslaved Africans were punished in public. Cobblestone streets, pastel houses, and colonial churches lined the hilltop, covering a very dark history of how Brazil was initially built by the Portuguese crown and settlers. From the 1500s onward, ships brought 5 million of African men, women, and children to Brazilian ports. They were forced to work on sugar plantations, in homes, in mines, and in the streets of Salvador. Today, more than 75 million people living in Brazil are of African descent, making Brazil one of the most diverse countries in the world. With more than 100 ways people use to describe what color they are: Negro, Moreno, Mulatto, or Cafuso, for example. Salvador streets are full of color and life. But beneath the celebration is a long history of struggle, courage, and survival. Portuguese plantation owners around Salvador could easily and cheaply obtain African slaves because of relatively short distance to Africa, and they needed a large number of those slaves to satisfy world growing demand for sugar. Salvador became one of the grandest cities in the New World, developed from profits of slavery-run plantation economy. Its colonial wealth is well visible in the historic center of the city. Easy access and brutal working conditions in this region of South America created dramatically different slavery economy in Brazil than in other colonies of the New World. Slavery in Bahia was among the harshest and most lethal forms in the Atlantic world. Many enslaved Africans in plantations died within 7 to 10 years of arrival. Workdays lasted 14 to 18 hours, especially during harvest season at sugar plantations. In a well-recommended book, Slavery Unseen, Lamont Edu upends the narrative of contemporary Brazil as a racial democracy, showing how its myths cover the history of sexual violence, patriarchal terror, and exploitation of slaves in Bahia and beyond. Bahia's colonial economy and much of its cultural legacy was built on suffering, resistance, adaptation, and strength of millions of enslaved West Africans. You can see the presence of African influences everywhere in Bahia, predominantly from West Africa regions around today Gambia, Senegal, Guinea, Benin, Angola, or Nigeria. You can taste the African influences in the local food. You can hear it in the music. Experience it through candomblé houses across Salvador, keeping African religious traditions alive, alongside Catholic churches, blending faiths in a unique cultural harmony. While the history of slavery in Bahia is painful, the legacy is very powerful and visible on every corner. The survival of so much African culture is a testimony to resistance against conditions meant to erase identity. Next, we are heading to the neighborhood called Santo Antonio Alem do Carmo. This corner of Salvador feels like it's moving at its own tempo, unhurried, creative, quietly magnetic. Townhouses in sun-faded pinks, blues, and yellows line the street like a living color palette, their shutters half open. This is the kind of place where you slow your walk without realizing it. Walk into one of the cafes and you're rewarded with sweeping views of the Bay of All Saints, shimmering and expansive, reminding you why Salvador has always been a city shaped by the sea. Cafes and bars here offer a relaxing view of the sunset over returning boats and ferries from the nearby islands, and it is certainly one of the highlights of visiting the historic neighborhoods, finding the right spot at the right time to enjoy beer or local caipirinha. Rule number 1 for your evening in the historic center. If you hear drums, walk toward them. Street bands, samba reggae rehearsals, and pop-up performances happen everywhere. Bars with live music are usually better than the ones that look fancy. The drums arrive first, deep, heavy, impossible to ignore. They echo through the streets and captivate visitors walking by. This is Salvador da Bahia, rehearsing for its famous annual carnival that happens usually around February or March. Weeks before the official dates, neighborhoods fill with drum lines, practicing samba reggae and Afro-Blocos rhythms. The carnival in Salvador is one of the largest street parties in the world, drawing about 2 million people over the course of the festivities. Roughly half of those are visitors, tourists, with the rest being local participants. But even if you visit between October and January, you will find many bands practicing in the streets, giving you a flavor of what carnival must feel like. If you plan to visit for carnival, book accommodation way in advance and get ready for some wild street party. The square in front of the cathedral comes alive with live music, bands, and performances. The sun sets around 6 p.m., so the nightlife starts quite early. Next day, we're back to the heart of Pelourinho to try some local authentic food in a local gastronomy school, offering different Bahian tastes, from seafood to the countryside specialities. You can find it at the Largo do Pelourinho Square, just next to the Museum of Gastronomy of Bahia. This is a unique place where tradition meets education and where Bahian cuisine is prepared with care, pride, and a deep respect for local flavors. The restaurant offers lunch buffet until 3:30 in the afternoon. And what makes this experience even more special is knowing that every dish is prepared by students training in the culinary arts. This isn't just a restaurant, it's also a local classroom. From seafood dishes inspired by the coast of Bahia to comforting stews and perfectly paired sides, this is a culinary journey through Bahian cuisine without leaving Pelourinho. The aromas of coconut milk, fresh herbs and spices define the soul of Bahia. This is comfort food, but with layers of history of African influences behind it. And after lunch, it's time for coffee. Just downstairs you will find a cafe and chocolate coffee shop where you can taste different and elaborate locally sourced coffees. This was by far the best coffee selection we tried in Bahia. So if you are passing by and need a caffeine boost, step inside and choose from a variety of coffee preparation methods. Salvador is a city of colors, rhythm, Afro-Brazilian heritage, and devotion. To understand Bahia, one has to grasp deep and lasting influence of the Catholic Church and its entanglement with colonial power and the transatlantic slave trade. From the very beginning, the Catholic Church stood at the center of colonial life here. Its influence and wealth is visible everywhere across the historic center of the city, from magnificent baroque churches to monasteries and convents. The church played an ambiguous role in this slave trade. On one hand, Catholic doctrine taught the spiritual equality of souls. Enslaved Africans were baptized, married, and buried under church rites. Brotherhoods, known as Irmandades, sometimes offered limited mutual aid and community for Black Catholics. By 1704, the Brotherhood raised sufficient funds to construct a church where slaves and freedmen could worship and congregate. This is the Church of the Third Order of Our Lady of the Rosary of the Black People. It is open to public and can be visited. This is also where you can experience a Catholic Mass with some African influences. Throughout centuries, the Catholic Church largely accepted slavery as a social reality and way to develop the colony of Salvador and Bahia. In fact, many religious orders bought and owned enslaved people. Wealth generated by slave labor financed the construction of Salvador's most iconic church landmarks: gold-leafed altars, towering cathedrals, and ornate convents that still define the city's skyline today. Enslaved Africans did not abandon their spiritual traditions. Instead, they adapted. Under the watchful eye of Catholic authorities, African religions blended with Catholic imagery, giving rise to Afro-Brazilian faiths, like Candomblé. This spiritual resistance reshaped Salvador's culture forever. Today, Catholic processions share the streets with Afro-Brazilian rituals. Drums echo alongside church bells. Faith here is layered and deeply rooted in survival. Just after dusk, some of the historic churches open doors to both worshippers and visitors, curious to see the blend of both Catholic and African customs.
Em nome do Pai, e do Filho, e do Espírito Santo. Amém.
When slavery was finally abolished in Brazil in 1888, the last country in the Americas to do so, the social inequalities it created did not disappear. The church would later play roles in abolitionist movements and social justice efforts. But the legacy of its earlier complicity remains part of Salvador's historical reckoning. The Catholic Church helped shape the city's architecture, culture, and identity, while also being deeply entwined with colonialism and slavery. At the same time, the people of Salvador transformed imposed faith into something uniquely their own. When you notice colorful ribbons tied to church gates, railings, or even wrists, think of Afro-Brazilian candomblé. Tying ribbons becomes not just a Catholic act of devotion, but also a subtle continuation of African spiritual practice, one that survived centuries of repression. The last famous landmark is next door, the main church and convent of San Francisco. Built in the early 18th century by Franciscan friars, the church has survived centuries of time, climate, and change. From the outside, it feels humble, but step inside and the world transforms, as every surface glows with gold in a breathtaking display of baroque art. In recent years, accidents and structural incidents have served as a reminder of how fragile this masterpiece is, renewing efforts to protect, restore, and preserve one of Brazil's most extraordinary expressions of sacred art. In February 2025, one person died, and 5 others were injured after the church roof collapsed above the golden altar. Completed in the early 18th century by Franciscan friars, this monastery rose during Salvador's peak as the capital of colonial Brazil and one of the most important ports in the Atlantic world. The immense wealth that funded its gold and art-covered interior was deeply connected to the colonial economy, an economy sustained by enslaved African labor and the transatlantic slave trade. Inside the monastery museum, you encounter sacred artworks that once shaped daily Franciscan life. Wooden sculptures, religious paintings, and centuries-old liturgical objects. Each piece reflects the fusion of European Baroque traditions with local Brazilian craftsmanship, offering insight into how faith was practiced and taught in colonial Salvador. Modern historians view the Franciscans in Salvador as both spiritual caretakers and participants in a slave society. Their legacy reflects the broader contradiction of colonial Catholicism, preaching compassion and salvation while operating within and benefiting from one of the largest slave economies in the Atlantic world. Finally, one also has to remember that under colonial rule and the Catholic Church, the enslaved people were frequently investigated by church and prosecuted by the Inquisition, especially for practicing African religions, Islamic beliefs, or even African healing practices. Many of the enslaved West Africans were Muslim and continued to practice their faith in secrecy. Next, it's time to explore Salvador's stunning coastline and its postcard-perfect beaches. That, however, we'll share in the next video, along with recommendation for top 10 experiences that Salvador da Bahia can offer, including this historical fortress, guarding the bay and its golden sand beaches. So check the second part video for some practical tips how to plan your visit, what to be aware of, and where to head to join locals for some relaxed time in the sun. If you have any questions, drop in comments below. And if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe button for some more stories and hiking from South America and around the world.